Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine stepping back in time to the streets of Victorian England. The lamps glow faintly in the fog, horse-drawn carriages rattle over cobblestones, and behind the tall brick houses, a new day is just beginning for children of the era. Tonight, let us wander gently through their world, a world both strict and tender, filled with peculiar rules, harsh remedies, and curious traditions. This is the story of Victorian parenting and childhood.
In the early hours, children stirred awake in cold nurseries. The fire had long since gone out, and the draught from tall windows crept across the floor. The nursery was more than a bedroom. It was a kingdom of rules. Here, children tiptoed instead of walking. Toys were admired, but rarely played with. Dolls must remain fully clothed or risk moral censure. Even laughter was considered too loud, too careless. In this space, discipline came not from parents, but from the formidable figure of the nanny, a woman who blended the role of nurse, teacher, and drill sergeant.
Breakfast was not a feast of joy, but a lesson in restraint. A bowl of gruel, thick, gray, and without sugar, waited for the children. It was said to build character. Meals were eaten in silence, sometimes even in Latin, as posture was corrected and manners observed. To misbehave at the table was to invite shame, and perhaps a lecture before the entire family.
Once breakfast was cleared, lessons began. The walls echoed with the scratch of nib pens. Children practiced neat handwriting, recited moral poetry, and repeated maxims about virtue and obedience. Subjects were harsh but orderly: Latin, arithmetic, geography, and history. Education was less about curiosity and more about discipline. A mistake might earn the cane. Slow learners wore the dunce cap. And yet, even in such sternness, there was a sense of pride. Knowledge was a path to respectability, and memory work was thought to shape both the mind and the soul.
Late in the morning, children were marched outdoors for fresh air. The Victorian faith in open air was unshakable, even though city skies were choked with coal smoke. Babies were sometimes placed in wire cages, hanging from windows so they could breathe the air. Playtime itself was regimented. Games were educational, laughter subdued. Toys were wooden, fragile, sometimes dangerous. A scraped knee or splinter was considered a small lesson in endurance. Yet for many children, even these rigid walks and cautious games were moments of escape, tiny windows of joy in a world ruled by silence. Cleanliness was pursued with equal severity. Baths came once a week, in water often shared by the whole household. Harsh carbolic soap left the skin raw. Hair was washed rarely, lice combed out as a grim ritual. The medicine cabinet was a dangerous place. Bottles of opium syrup, mercury ointments, and carbolic acid sat alongside tonics of alcohol. For teething babies, a syrup laced with morphine was given. For coughs, a spoon of brandy. The remedies soothed, but often carried hidden harm. The afternoon brought more lessons. Some wrote essays, others stitched samplers. Those who disobeyed were corrected, sometimes with the rod, more often with shame. A child might be made to sit silently in a reflection chair or endure the sting of a wooden spoon. Parents believed that character was forged in hardship and that obedience would prepare children for the struggles of life. To spare the rod, they thought, was to spoil the child.
Clothing itself was a form of discipline. Layers of fabric weighed heavily on small bodies. Girls tightened into corsets to enforce posture. Boys wore stiff collars that cut at the neck. Every ribbon, every stitch was a reminder of propriety. To dress each morning was to submit, to learn patience, and to remember one's place in society.
Dinner, though more elaborate than breakfast, was equally strict. Children sat straight-backed, answering questions with "yes, mother" or "no, father." Conversation was formal, food carefully portioned. Sweets were rare, reserved for holidays. For most children, a single boiled sweet at Christmas was the pinnacle of delight. Toothaches were common, and dentistry offered little comfort. Nightfall brought rituals of prayer and fear. Children knelt by their bedsides, whispering petitions to keep their souls tidy. Bedtime stories were not fairy tales, but cautionary warnings of children lost, of spirits waiting in the dark. Superstitions hovered in every corner. A dropped fork might summon a ghost. Spilled salt meant misfortune. And so children went to sleep, not with comfort, but with watchfulness, lying beneath layers of blankets in rooms painted with arsenic-dyed curtains, clutching each other against the chill of nightmares. As children grew older, silence followed them into adolescence. Puberty was met with mystery and vague warnings. Girls were trained in modesty, their corsets pulled tighter. Boys were taught to suppress emotion, to become serious. Diaries absorbed their unspoken thoughts. Emotional expression was considered dangerous, even shameful, so they sighed quietly and endured. Yet, once a year, joy peeked through the rigid curtain. At Christmas, homes glittered with decorations, carefully guarded from fire. Children received a single toy, and perhaps an orange, bright, cold, and treasured. Families gathered for carols, parlor games, and long walks in frosty air. Even here, formality lingered, but within it, a rare glow of warmth, of festivity, of shared memory. Victorian childhood was not an age of innocence, but of endurance. It was shaped by discipline, superstition, and harsh remedies. Yet it was also a time of resilience, of shared struggles, of silent companionship between siblings. These children grew into adults hardened by trial, yet bound by the memory of lessons learned in cold nurseries and candlelit prayers. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, remember them, and may your dreams be warmer, gentler, and filled with kindness.